The morning of her father's funeral dawned cold and gray, the sky heavy with unfallen rain. Eva stood alone at the edge of the gathered mourners, her thin black dress no shield against the chill. Whispers rustled through the crowd like dead leaves skittering across stone. Eyes flicked toward her, then quickly away as though her gaze alone might bring misfortune. Her father, Tomas, had been a good man, strong, fair, and respected. His death had been sudden, shocking the village. One day he had stood laughing by the hearth, and the next he lay pale and still in his bed, breathless without any wound or sickness. Eva's uncle, Baron, arrived late to the burial, his boots muddy and cloak swirling about his broad frame. He had not wept. Instead, he had stood before the mourners with hard, narrowed eyes and a voice that carried over the crowd. "It was not nature that took my brother," Baron had said darkly. "There is witchcraft here." A murmur spread through the villagers. Eva had frozen where she stood, her heart a cold stone in her chest. Baron's gaze had swept the crowd, then fixed upon her. "His own daughter," he intoned. "Strange things followed her since she was small. Shadows in the corners. Sudden chills. The animals know it, they flee from her. Lies. All lies." Eva opened her mouth to protest, but her voice seemed caught in her throat. No one spoke for her. Not her aunts, not her cousins. One by one they lowered their eyes or shifted away. In the days that followed, Baron's words spread like wildfire. Villagers who had once smiled at Eva now crossed the street to avoid her. Whispers followed her through the marketplace, soft, fearful voices calling her cursed, unnatural. Her aunts no longer let her eat with them. They kept her to the cold outer room where the wind slipped through the cracks in the walls. The cousins who had once braided her hair now looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Stay away from us," one cousin hissed, backing away when Eva reached for a pot of stew. "You brought death into this house." Eva's world, once small and warm with the life her father had built, now closed in like a snare. The rooms felt tighter. The days colder. Her father's voice haunted her ears, his lessons on fairness and truth seeming now like fragments of a forgotten dream. The worst came one evening as she sat alone beneath the kitchen window, her thin arms wrapped around her knees. Outside, she heard Baron's voice through the cracked shutters, speaking low and urgent to the village elder. "She must be dealt with," Baron said. "The land is cursed while she breathes." "You are certain?" the elder asked warily. "Certain." Baron's voice was heavy with false grief. "For my brother's sake. For all of us." The elder said nothing more. The night swallowed their voices, leaving Eva shaking in the dark. In the days after, no one spoke to her except to give cold commands. No one met her eyes. Her hands trembled when she tried to scrub the floor or sweep the hearth, though she forced herself to keep going. If she stopped, the fear would swallow her whole. But alone in her cot at night, with only thin blankets for comfort, Eva wept. She had no mother to turn to, lost in childbirth years ago. No father now to shield her. And those she had once called family had turned cold as stone. She had no one left. And as the days stretched on, a terrible certainty grew in her heart. They would not stop at whispers. Her uncle's lies would not be satisfied with fear alone. Something worse was coming. Something final. The sun rose pale and thin, a weak disk in the winter sky. The village of Greven was silent but for the murmuring winds through the bare trees and the low sounds of livestock in their pens. Inside the stone house that had once been full of warmth and laughter, Eva sat alone by the cold hearth, her knees drawn to her chest, her breath a pale mist in the frosted air. It had been 6 days since the funeral. 6 long, dreadful days since her uncle's voice had first declared her a witch in front of the village. And in those 6 days the world had changed. At first it had been glances. The quick flick of eyes away when Eva walked down the street to fetch water. The sharp whisper of mothers pulling their children to the other side of the road. Then came the space, an empty circle forming around her whenever she dared step into the market square. Eva felt it like a weight on her skin. Fear. Tangible. Thick. She saw it in the way the baker no longer greeted her with a smile, in the way old Marit, who had known her since birth, clutched an iron charm when she passed. Even the village dogs, sensing the unease of their masters, growled softly when she neared. Rumors spread like wildfire. "They say her father's heart stopped because of a spell," one woman whispered in the apothecary's shop. "I heard shadows were seen in her window the night he died," murmured another. "My cousin says the hens stopped laying when she walked past," said a third. No one spoke to Eva. No one listened when she tried to explain, her voice trembling but steady, insisting she had done nothing wrong. Her words were swallowed by the tide of fear. Her family turned colder by the day. The house, once her refuge, now became her prison. Her aunts moved her belongings into the farthest room, a small drafty space with no hearth and barely enough light. Her cousins no longer shared meals with her, whispering behind closed doors. She overheard them one evening. "She brings bad luck," her cousin Merrick said. "I heard Uncle Baron tell the elders." "She's dangerous," another cousin replied. "Better if she's kept out of sight." From then on, Ava's days passed in isolation. She was made to eat her meals alone, cold bread and broth shoved through the door without a word. Her chores remained, scrubbing floors, fetching wood, carrying water, but her footsteps were followed by wary eyes. One morning as she crossed the square to the well, a group of children spotted her. They scattered like frightened birds, one little girl screaming, "Witch!" as she ran. The word echoed in Ava's mind, sharp and cruel. Her hands trembled as she drew water. Her throat burned with the effort not to cry. She tried to be brave. She told herself her father would not have wanted her to give in to fear. He had taught her that truth would always triumph over lies. But what use was truth when no one would listen? The days grew colder, the frost biting harder. Ava's skin grew raw from scrubbing and the chill in her small room. Her hair tangled, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She had no more friends. Even the old widow who once gave her sweet herbs and warm bread now shut the door quickly at Ava's approach. Fear ruled the village. Fear marked Ava as cursed. And in her heart, beneath the growing sorrow, a small ember of anger began to burn. For she knew she had done nothing wrong. She had loved her father. She had no dark powers. Yet here she was, locked away, shunned and despised. Each night she lay awake, the cold creeping through the thin walls, and wondered, how far would their fear go? What would her uncle do next? She remembered his words at the funeral. His cold, triumphant gaze. His hunger for the land that should be hers. And in that bleak darkness, Ava realized the truth. Her uncle would not rest while she lived. His lies would not stop. Something worse was coming. She could feel it in her bones. The wind howled through the timbers of the old house, rattling the shutters and creeping beneath the doors. The air was colder than usual that night, colder even than the heart of those within. Ava lay curled on the thin pallet in her small room, her body aching from a day of endless chores. The single blanket did little to fight the chill. Sleep would not come. Her mind whirled with the weight of the days behind her and the dread of what might lie ahead. Since her father's death, the coldness of the villagers had only deepened. Whispers of witchcraft grew louder, more frequent. No one spoke to her unless in scorn. No one offered kindness. And within her own home, her uncle's shadow loomed large, heavier with each passing day. Baron had moved into her father's study now, sitting at the great desk Ava had once been proud to polish. He walked through the house as though it already belonged to him. The other family members, her aunts, cousins, followed his lead. Their glances were wary, filled with a cruel satisfaction whenever they looked her way. That night, as the moon rose behind thin clouds, Ava heard voices. She sat up, heart pounding. The voices came from the main hall, low and urgent. She crept from her pallet and pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear. Baron was speaking. His voice was sharp, angry. "This cannot go on. The girl is poison. The land itself sours beneath her." A murmured reply from Aunt Malda. "But what can we do? The villagers already whisper." Baron cut her off. "Let them whisper. We will give them reason to. It is justice. The girl is a witch and witches must be dealt with." Ava's breath caught. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She pressed closer. Another voice, Cousin Merrick, hesitant. "But if she were to disappear, there would be questions." "There will be no questions," Baron said coldly. "We will say the spirits claimed her as they did Tomas. The elders will not argue. And the land," here his voice darkened with greed, "will finally be free to pass to me as it should have when my brother fell." A heavy silence followed. Then Aunt Malda spoke again, quieter this time. "Are you certain?" "I am," Baron answered. "The girl is alone. No one will mourn her. No one will stop us." Ava's blood turned to ice. She forced herself to breathe slowly, silently, her mind racing. Her uncle wanted her dead. And soon. Another cousin asked in a hushed voice, "How?" Baron replied, each word like the tolling of a bell, "Tomorrow night. We will take her to the forest. Deep where no one will hear her screams. We will bury her. It will be done." Ava gasped before she could stop herself. She clapped a hand over her mouth, heart hammering wildly. Footsteps approached. Her uncle's voice, suddenly sharp. "Did you hear that?" Ava scrambled silently back to her pallet, pulling the blanket over her trembling body. Her door creaked open. Heavy boots thudded inside. Baron stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the room. Ava forced herself to breathe evenly, feigning sleep. Her heart pounded so hard she feared it might give her away. After a long moment, Baron grunted. Nothing. He turned and left, the door closing with a soft thud. Only then did Ava let the tears fall, silent, hot against her chilled skin. Her own family, though she had lived beside her whole life, planned to murder her and bury her in the cold earth. They would call it justice. They would take her father's land. She could not stay. She could not wait for the coming night. But where could she go? Who in the village would shelter her now? Ava's mind spun, torn between fear and the burning anger that grew with every breath. She would not let them win. She would not die like this, alone and forgotten beneath the soil. As the first pale light of dawn touched the sky, Ava made her decision. She would survive. She must. And if they came for her, she would be ready. The night was ink black, the moon absent behind a sky thick with clouds. Not even a star pierced the darkness. It was the kind of night where shadows swallowed all, where the wind's sighs could be mistaken for voices, where unseen things could move freely. Ava lay on her thin pallet, the memory of her uncle's grim words burning in her mind. She had barely slept since overhearing the plot. Her body was weak from days of meager food and cold. Fear gnawed at her, sharp and unrelenting. She had tried to think of a way out. She had tried to plan. But they watched her too closely now, two of her cousins lingering by her door, pretending to sharpen knives or carry buckets. Her every move was shadowed. She had found no chance to flee. Now, lying in the cold gloom of her room, dread weighed on her chest. A strange hush had fallen over the house. No late voices, no creaking floorboards. The very walls seemed to hold their breath. Then she heard it, the soft scrape of leather on stone. Boots moving carefully. Low voices. The door burst open. Ava barely had time to cry out before rough hands seized her. She struggled, kicking and clawing, but her strength was no match for theirs. Her uncle, grim-faced, led the way. Cousin Merrick bound her wrists tightly behind her back with coarse rope. Another cousin stuffed a foul-smelling rag between her teeth and tied it fast, gagging her. She tried to scream, her voice muffled to a helpless moan. Quiet, witch, Baron spat. Your curses end tonight. Ava thrashed wildly, but they dragged her from the room, down the dark hallway and out into the biting cold. Outside the wind had risen. The trees moaned overhead, bare branches clawing at the sky. The snow underfoot was patchy but cold, seeping through her thin shoes as they hauled her along the narrow path leading out of the village. No one came to help. No one dared open their doors. Deeper they went, past the last cottage, past the frost-covered fields, into the ancient woods that had long been a place of fear and superstition. The great oaks loomed above them, their twisted forms older than the village itself. The ground here was damp and bitter, thick with moss and roots. Ava's heart pounded as her breath came in sharp gasps through her nose. Her arms ached, bound too tightly behind her back. Her eyes stung with tears, not just of terror but of helpless fury. After what felt like an eternity they stopped. Baron barked an order and two cousins began digging, their shovels slicing into the cold, damp earth. Ava watched in horror as the shallow grave took shape before her. Baron stood over her, his face hard and pale. You brought this upon yourself, he said. You cursed this family. You killed my brother. His voice rose, sharp with false righteousness. We bury you now so the land may be cleansed of your evil. Aunt Malda hovered nearby, clutching a small iron charm and whispering prayers. The cousins' faces were tense, grim. Only Merrick glanced at Ava with the barest flicker of uncertainty, but he kept digging. Ava writhed against the ropes, her muffled sobs filling the cold air. Her legs had gone numb from the march. Her body shook with cold and dread. The grave was soon ready, a pit barely deep enough to cover her. Baron seized her by the shoulders and dragged her forward. The ground was wet beneath her knees. The earth smelled of rot and old leaves. Let the forest take you, cursed child, her uncle intoned. He gestured for her cousins to help. Together they forced Ava into the shallow pit, her body twisted and bound, her face pressed to the damp soil. The weight of the earth loomed above her. Through her terror, a strange clarity rose in Ava's mind. She was not cursed. She was not evil. This was no justice. It was murder driven by greed and hate. And she would not let them win. As Baron began to pray loudly, calling upon the old spirits of the wood to cleanse their family, Ava forced her mind to focus. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, "Strength comes from within, child. Even in darkness." The first shovelful of earth hit her back with a cold thud. Another followed and another. Panic clawed at her throat. Her lungs burned. But somewhere deep within, a stubborn fire blazed to life. This was not the end. She would not let this be the end. The first waves of soil struck her shoulders and head in rapid thuds, each one a cold, suffocating blow. Ava writhed and thrashed, her muffled screams lost in the stillness of the forest night. The ropes bound her wrists so tightly that her fingers felt numb, but she fought against them with desperate strength. Earth pressed into her mouth and nose, forcing her to turn her head sideways, gasping ragged breaths through her nostrils as best she could. Above, her uncle's voice boomed with grim certainty, "Let her rot beneath the soil, let her wickedness be sealed." His cousins shoveled faster, eager to be done. The weight of dirt mounted quickly, pinning Ava's legs, her hips, her back. Within minutes, her body was half buried, unable to move freely. Terror surged through her veins, sharp as a blade. She thrashed again, screaming against the gag, but no one listened. No one would come. The forest watched in silence, its ancient boughs swaying overhead. Then came the final shovelfuls, covering her chest, her neck, her face. Cold soil seeped into her hair, filled her ears. Ava squeezed her eyes shut as the darkness swallowed her whole. A beat of stillness. The scrape of shovels ceased. Muffled voices drifted through the thin veil of earth. Then footsteps receded. First her cousins, then her uncle, their voices fading into the night. And Ava was alone. Buried alive. At first, sheer panic gripped her. Her body thrashed uselessly beneath the crushing weight, her lungs heaving. The gag stifled her cries. The ropes cut into her wrists. Dirt pressed hard against her ribs, making every breath a shallow, frantic gasp. "I'm going to die," her mind screamed. Here. Like this. Alone. Forgotten. 4 long, agonizing minutes, she struggled wildly, burning through what little air remained in the small pockets around her face. Her heart thundered in her ears. Then instinct forced her still. If she kept panicking, kept thrashing, she would use up what little air she had. "Breathe," she told herself. "Breathe. Think." Tears streaked her face, mingling with mud and grime. Slowly, painfully, her panic shifted, first to dread, then to something harder, sharper. Anger. This was not fate. This was murder, driven by greed and lies. Her uncle had stolen everything from her, her father's land, her freedom, her life. No more. The words burned through her mind. Something fierce flared inside her, brighter than her terror, the will to live. With slow, deliberate effort, Ava tested her limbs. The soil was packed but not yet solid. Her upper body was trapped, but her arms, bound at the wrists, could still move slightly. The ropes were tight, but the moisture of the earth had softened them, ever so slightly. Gritting her teeth, she began to twist her wrists, grinding them against the cords, forcing her skin to scrape and tear if needed. Pain flared, sharp and raw, but she welcomed it, proof that she was still alive. Minutes dragged by. Her breaths grew tighter, her vision swimming with the strain. But she kept at it, refusing to yield. Finally, snap. A strand of the rope gave way. Then another. With a final wrench, her wrists pulled free, raw and bloodied but unbound. Hope surged through her. She flexed her fingers, clawed at the damp soil above her head. The weight was immense, the cold earth pressing down on her like a tomb. But her will burned hotter still. With fingers curled into claws, she began to dig. Inch by inch, fistful by fistful, Ava clawed upward, pulling dirt away from her face, clearing enough space to gasp for air. The soil was wet, sticky, but not so dense she couldn't move it. Each handful lifted felt like a victory. Each ragged breath gave her strength. Her arms ached. Her chest heaved. Her lungs burned. Still she dug. Time lost all meaning, seconds, minutes, perhaps an hour. The cold seeped deep into her bones, but Ava kept going. Her fingernails cracked, her palms bled. But she would not stop. Then, a shift in the earth above her. A faint wisp of cold air. Her heart leapt. She clawed faster, more frantically. And then, her hand broke through. Her fingers brushed open air. With a ragged scream, hoarse and raw, Ava pushed upward, her head and shoulders emerging from the grave. Dirt tumbled down around her as she gasped for clean, frigid night air. For a moment, she knelt there in the shallow pit, shaking, panting, covered in blood and earth. Then her voice rose, low at first, then louder, fierce, unbroken, filled with all the rage and defiance she had buried deep inside. "I am not dead." The forest seemed to echo her cry. The wind stirred, carrying her voice through the trees. She had survived. And now she would return, not as a victim but as something more. The taste of soil in her mouth was bitter, metallic. Every inch of her lungs burned with the effort to draw in air. Ava's body trembled violently, her bloodied hands clawing through the suffocating earth in slow, painful bursts. Each motion scraped skin from her knuckles, nails tearing away, but she could not stop. She would not stop. Suddenly her right hand struck a hollow, a thin pocket in the dirt where roots had once curled and died. For one desperate moment, Ava froze, her heart pounding. Then she pressed her face toward the faint emptiness and inhaled sharply. Air. Thin, stale, but air nonetheless. A sob escaped her throat, though it sounded more like a strangled rasp. Her limbs sagged momentarily with relief, but the respite was short. The air would not last. She had to keep going. As she fought to calm her ragged breaths, a memory drifted through the haze of her mind, her mother's voice, soft and sure, telling bedtime tales beneath the stars. Stories of old magic forgotten by most. Magic not of spells or charms but of belief. Of earth and sky listening to those who truly believed. The earth remembers us, her mother had once whispered. It listens to the desperate, the broken-hearted, the ones with nothing left but will. If you ever need it, truly need it, speak to it. And listen. Ava's eyes fluttered shut. The weight of soil pressed on her chest, her ribs aching with every breath. Her arms moved sluggishly, exhaustion seeping into her bones. She was so close to giving in. But that voice, that memory. Her mother's words wrapped around her like a lifeline. She forced her hands to still, palms pressed flat against the cold earth above her face. Her lips parted in a hoarse whisper. I am Ava, daughter of Marin. I do not wish to die here. The words trembled on her breath. I believe in you. The forest above was silent. The earth around her remained still. But beneath her palms, Ava imagined the faintest stir. A shift in the soil's tension, or perhaps only hope. Please, she whispered. Hear me. She pressed her forehead into the dirt, sweat mingling with mud. Her mind cleared, focusing on her breath, on her pulse, on the raw wool burning in her chest. The earth had cradled her ancestors, fed their crops, sheltered their roots. It was not her enemy. Not truly. It was life and death both, if she could only make it listen. I will not die here, she whispered again, louder this time. I have more to do. Then a tremor. Small, subtle. A soft shift in the soil above her head. Not a collapse, not a new weight, something different. As if the ground had loosened just slightly beneath her touch. Her eyes flew open. The moment was fleeting, fragile. If she hesitated, it would pass. With a surge of strength, Ava thrust her hands upward. The earth that had seemed immovable only moments before gave way more easily now, the soil parting beneath her torn fingers. Roots bent aside. Clumps of dirt broke loose. Every motion felt monumental. Her shoulders burned. Her breath was shallow. But she dug faster, driven by new hope. Thank you, she whispered between gasps. I won't forget. Another shift. Another breath of thin, cold air. Her face pressed closer to the widening hollow. The stale pocket was no longer enough. She needed the open sky. Her arms moved faster, pain forgotten. Bit by bit the barrier thinned. And then, light. Faint moonlight gleamed through the cracks above her. Ava's heart surged. With one final, desperate push, she broke through. Her hand burst into the open air, fingers grasping wildly at nothing and everything. Moments later, her head followed. Gasping, sobbing, she dragged herself upward, soil cascading down her back. The cool night air filled her lungs, sharp and biting, and she welcomed the pain of it. She knelt there, half emerged, shaking uncontrollably. Tears carved clean tracks through the mud on her face. Her mind swirled with disbelief and determination. The earth had heard her. It had not claimed her. She remembered her mother's stories, of earth spirits, of life's pulse running beneath the ground. And now, with her own breath, her own blood, Ava knew those stories had been true. The breath of the earth had sustained her. The will of her heart had guided her hands. She was alive. And with that life she would return. She was not finished. Her family had buried her with lies and greed. But Ava had risen, and with her, a secret would rise too. One that no grave could hold. ChatGPT said. The soil clung to her arms and hair, her breath still ragged from the narrow escape, but Ava's mind burned brighter than ever. With each clawing motion upward, muscles screaming, nails worn raw, an image kept flashing behind her eyes, a memory faint and buried like her but now rising. Her father's voice. The tone had been soft, not the booming authority he'd used with others, but the voice he saved for late nights, when her mother was already asleep and Ava would creep down the stairs to find him by the hearth. "Ava," he had whispered once, the lines of worry deep across his brow, "if anything ever happens to me, listen well." She had barely been old enough to understand the weight in his words, but they had struck her even then, a child's heart sensing the unspoken fear behind his eyes. "There are things your uncle hides, things he's done to this family. I have proof he fears. I've hidden it well, in the place no man would think to look. In the old house, beneath the stone where you first lost your tooth. Do you remember?" She had nodded then, though her mind was foggy with sleep. "It is a ledger, Ava. Names. Deeds. Secrets they will kill to bury. But truth does not rot beneath the earth." That last phrase, spoken in her father's voice, rattled through her with every pull of her arms now. Truth does not rot beneath the earth. Her father had known what his brother was capable of. Had known that greed and cruelty ran deeper than blood. And now, as Ava pushed her way through the last veil of soil, coughing hard, tears of fury mixed with relief, she knew what she must do. It wasn't enough that she had survived. The earth had answered her will, the breath of life had returned to her, but she could not vanish into the woods or hide among shadows. Her uncle would believe her dead, would tell the village she had run, shamed and cursed, and keep his grip on their lands. No. Ava would return, not just with her life but with the truth. She rolled onto her back beneath the stars, breath catching in her throat. The night sky stretched wide above her, the moon hanging heavy with pale light. Her hands shook as they brushed the last of the dirt from her face. The stone where you lost your tooth. The memory sharpened now. A flat stone, near the hearth in the old family house. Her father's house, stolen now by the uncle who had condemned her to the ground. She remembered that day clearly, a small child, weeping from her first lost tooth, sitting on the hearthstones when her father had comforted her. It was the only stone slightly darker than the others, cracked near the edge. That was the place. The ledger, real, undeniable proof, waited there still. Her uncle had not found it. He had been too eager, too certain of his new power. Too sure that burying Ava would bury every threat. But the earth had not allowed it. And neither would she. Ava's heart beat faster now, not from fear but purpose. She rose, her legs trembling. Her body ached, but her spirit felt stronger than it ever had. The forest stood silent around her, as though watching. Somewhere distant, an owl called softly. "Thank you," Ava whispered into the darkness. Whether to the earth, her mother's memory, or something older, she didn't know. But she meant it. She wiped the grime from her face as best she could, drawing herself upright. Her mind raced with the path ahead, quiet roads through the woods, a way to return unseen. Her uncle would believe her lost beneath the soil still. There was time. Time to reach the ledger. Time to uncover the truth. Ava clenched her fists. The fear that had once filled her chest had turned into something sharper, a resolve that no shallow grave could kill. She would reclaim her name. And when she faced them next, her uncle, her cousins, the village that had turned away, the secret would no longer be buried. It would rise with her. The cold of the earth seeped deep into her bones. Her lungs burned for each tiny sip of stale air. The pocket she had clawed out around her face was barely enough to keep her alive, but her body trembled on the edge of exhaustion. Her fingers, raw and torn, groped upward against the weight of the soil. Each breath tasted of dirt and fear. Yet beneath it all, anger began to stir, a molten current winding through the numbness. They had done this. Her own kin. Blood and bone. Her uncle with his poisonous whispers, her cousins with their cruel hands. The uncle's grim prayers still echoed in her mind, a mockery of justice spoken over her bound body. They had called it justice. Buried her like some pestilence to be hidden from the world. But she was not some helpless girl. Not anymore. Her father's secret burned in her memory now, like a beacon in the dark. There was truth to uncover and vengeance owed. But first she had to live. Ava flexed her fingers again, pushing upward. The soil resisted, heavy and packed, but rage lent her strength. Inch by inch she fought. "I will not die here." The words pulsed through her with each straining movement. Her muscles screamed, but she welcomed the pain. It was proof she still had fight left. The earth groaned faintly as her hands forced through layers of compacted dirt. A loose root tangled with her wrist. She grabbed it, using it to pull harder, arching her shoulders upward. More soil crumbled over her face. She spat it out, coughing violently, then redoubled her efforts. Time lost all meaning. Her world shrank to the press of earth, the desperate rhythm of her breath, the raw scrape of nails against roots and stones. Her mind clung to one image, her father leaning close by the hearth, whispering of the ledger of justice unclaimed. She would reach it. Her arms trembled, nearly useless now, but the anger kept her moving. Every betrayal, every lie, every sharp glance from villagers who believed the worst of her, it all built into a fire beneath her ribs. I will not die here. Fingernails struck something, a softer layer. The surface? Her heart thudded painfully. She clawed harder, faster. Then, a sudden breath of cool air, faint but unmistakable. She gasped sharply, nearly sobbing. She was close. With a guttural cry, Ava shoved her arms upward, tearing at the last layers of dirt. Her head broke through, gasping into the dawn. The sky was pale and cold, stars fading into a gray morning. Her mouth opened in a scream, a ragged, furious sound that ripped through the stillness of the forest. I am not dead, she howled into the waking world. Birds burst from the trees in alarm. Somewhere distant, a wolf answered. Ava's breath came in harsh gulps. Tears mingled with grime on her cheeks. Her body trembled, but she hauled herself upward, dragging her battered form from the shallow grave. When she stood, barefoot, caked in earth, hair wild and tangled, her eyes burned with a fury deeper than any fear. She would not hide. She would not forget. And she would not stop, until every secret was laid bare, and those who betrayed her faced the truth. At that moment, as dawn broke fully over the forest, Ava knew, this was her beginning, not her end. The road to the village felt longer than Ava remembered, though her steps were sure. Her body still ached, her muscles weak from the struggle underground, but her spirit burned brighter with each stride. She kept to the trees until the first rooftops came into view. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys. The morning light had warmed the earth, but to Ava the air still felt cold, haunted by what had been done, and by what she was about to do. At the edge of the market square, voices rose in their usual morning chatter, until a lone figure stepped into view, barefoot, wild-haired, skin streaked with dirt and blood. Gasps rang out. A woman dropped her basket of apples, scattering them across the ground. A child screamed and clung to his mother's skirts. She's dead, a man cried. She was buried. Spirit, she's come for vengeance, another whispered. Faces turned pale. The chatter stopped. The village froze. Ava kept walking. The stares did not stop her, nor the whispers. She had spent a lifetime with their eyes upon her, ever since her father's death. They had believed the lies her uncle spread, that she was cursed, that her grief had somehow drawn ill fortune. And they had looked away as her family grew crueler, locking her away, starving her, dragging her into the woods. Not anymore. Ava stopped in the center of the square. A ripple of movement parted the crowd. Her uncle strode forward, flanked by her cousins, faces pale, their bravado already faltering. But the uncle wore his mask well, concern, confusion, false grief. Ava, he said loudly, his voice pitched to the gathering crowd. You have returned to us, thank the spirits. We feared you lost to madness in the woods. Lies, smooth and practiced. Ava's gaze burned into him. Her voice rang clear. You feared I would speak. A hush fell. She stepped forward, filth and bruises plain for all to see. You tried to kill me. You and your sons. The uncle's face twitched. She's delirious. Starved. Someone fetched the healer. No, Ava said, her voice cutting through his. I heard you. In your own words. You planned it, for the land, for my father's wealth. You buried me alive. A murmur swept the crowd. She rose from the grave, someone whispered. No spirit could speak so. Ava's eyes swept the villagers, faces that had once looked away. You all believed his lies, she said coldly. But the truth is still buried, in my father's ledger, hidden beneath the hearth. Proof of every crime. Now the uncle's mask cracked. You speak nonsense. I will dig it out. And then we will see who stands condemned. The square held its breath. The villagers, afraid, uncertain, shifted uneasily. But in Ava's stance, in her voice, there was no fear. Only truth. And the truth, once spoken, could not be buried again. The search was swift once begun. The villagers, stirred by Ava's words and by the undeniable truth of her return, gathered at her father's old home. Even those who once feared her, who had once turned away, now followed her, curious, ashamed, compelled by something they could no longer ignore. With her hands still raw and dirt-streaked, Ava knelt by the hearth. Her fingers traced the worn stones until she found what her father had once whispered of, a loose slab, its edge barely visible. She pried it free with trembling hands. Beneath, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a thick ledger. Its pages crackled as she opened it, rows of careful script in her father's familiar hand, listing names, dates, debts, and betrayals. Records of false deals, forged wills, land seized through lies. Payments made to silence witnesses. All pointing to one man. When she rose, ledger in hand, her uncle's face had gone pale. His sons hovered behind him, uncertain and afraid. Ava held the book aloft. "Here is the truth," she said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Here is proof of his crimes, against my father, against this village." A murmur of anger rippled outward. The elders stepped forward, taking the ledger, examining its contents. Page after damning page. One elder looked up sharply. "This is no lie. These deeds are true." The uncle began to protest, voice rising in desperation. But no one listened. His words faltered as the villagers surrounded him, not with pitchforks or shouts, but with a heavy silence far more damning. "You buried your own blood to steal what was not yours," another elder said coldly. "There can be no place for you here." By midday judgment was passed. The uncle and his sons were cast out, stripped of land and name, forbidden from returning. The ledger was sealed among the elders' records, a testament to the justice won by Ava's own hand. And Ava, bruised, battered but unbroken, stood at the heart of it all. When she reclaimed her father's house, none dared protest. The land was hers by right. Her strength and her truth had earned it anew. In the days that followed, the village changed. Whispers of fear turned to quiet respect. Where once her name had been cursed, now it was spoken with reverence. The children who had once been warned away from the forest now played at its edge, no longer afraid. The woods that had hidden her grave now stood as a place of life and survival, where Ava had fought her way back into the world. And though scars remained, Ava held her head high, walking her land with calm certainty. The forest knew her. The earth had answered her will. And the village at last listened. The morning after Ava's return, the village was not the same. Word had spread fast, how she had come back from a grave her own family had dug. How she had walked into the square with dirt still clinging to her skin, her eyes clear and fierce. How she had spoken her uncle's name and accused him of murder, not in whispers but for all to hear. No one could forget the look on her uncle's face as she had stood there, alive, with the forest wind at her back and the strength of truth in her voice. Now the village gathered again. The sun rose slowly, golden light creeping over rooftops, spilling into the square. By the time the elders had called for council, nearly every villager had come. They brought their children. The oldest leaned on sticks, the youngest peered wide-eyed from behind their mother's skirts. The blacksmith left his forge cold. The weaver left her loom half-threaded. Even the baker, who never closed his shop, stood in the crowd. Ava was there first. She stood beside the elders, the leather-bound ledger in her hands. The bruises on her arms had darkened overnight. Her fingers were scraped raw, nails torn from clawing through earth. But her stance was straight, her gaze steady. She wore her father's old cloak, mended, a little faded, its hem brushing the ground. Behind her, the village murmured. Not with fear now but with curiosity. With something like hope. When the uncle arrived, flanked by his sons all red-eyed from lack of sleep, he still tried to wear the old mask of calm. He walked with measured steps, chin raised, eyes cool. But his hands trembled slightly. His voice, when he spoke, had lost its easy lilt. "This is madness," he said, looking to the elders first. "A girl lost in grief, spouting wild tales. Will we let such nonsense stain this council?" But none of the elders met his gaze. They looked instead at the ledger Ava held. And at Ava herself. "Let us hear her," one elder said quietly. The others nodded. Ava stepped forward. Her voice carried clearly in the crisp morning air. "You all know how my father died," she said. "You know what was said about me after, how I was blamed for the storm, for his death, for curses that never were." She swept her gaze across the crowd. "You believed those lies. And you looked away when I was locked away. You heard the whispers, saw the bruises. And still, you turned away." A silence answered her. A few heads bowed. Some eyes filled with shame. "But I will not stay silent any more," Ava went on. She held up the ledger. "Here is the truth. My father kept these records. Every deal my uncle made behind closed doors. Every false claim. Every bribe." She opened the book, her fingers steady despite their wounds. "Gold taken from the village coffers. Land deeds forged after my father's death. Witnesses paid to speak lies about me." She read names. dates, amounts. The uncle's name written again and again in her father's careful hand. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some shouted in anger. Others looked to the uncle with horror dawning on their faces. The uncle's mask finally cracked. "She's lying," he shouted. "She faked those pages, she made it all up to steal what's mine." But no one listened. The elders had taken the ledger, poring over its pages. One old man, who had once served as the village scribe, ran a finger along the ink. "This is no forgery," he said at last. "This is your brother's hand." "I knew it well." More voices rose. "He buried her alive," someone cried. "What more proof do we need? Throw him out. Let him answer for what he's done." The uncle's face twisted. His sons stood frozen, fear in their eyes. In the growing roar of the crowd, the uncle made one last attempt to flee, shoving aside an elder, trying to force his way through the gathering. But the villagers closed ranks. Even those who had once believed his lies now stood firm. The elders called for quiet. When the crowd hushed, one of the oldest, a gray-bearded man whose voice still held strength, spoke. "By the laws of this village," he said solemnly, "one who commits such crimes, murder, theft, betrayal of kin, cannot remain among us." He looked to the uncle. "You are banished, you and your sons. You will leave this land by sundown. If you return, you will face the blade." There was no plea, no argument. The uncle's face had gone ashen. With no choice left, he stumbled away, his sons following. The crowd parted to let them pass, no kindness in their eyes. When they were gone, the elders turned to Ava. "Your father's land is yours by right," one said. "This house, these fields, these woods, you will claim them now." Ava bowed her head, voice quiet but firm. "I will." The village remained gathered long after. Word spread to every corner, of the uncle's crimes, of Ava's survival, of her strength. Some came forward to speak to her, voices choked with guilt. The blacksmith, the baker, the weaver. One by one they offered what they could, tools, food, help to restore her home. I'm sorry," the blacksmith said at last, voice rough. "We should have seen." Ava met his gaze. "You see now. Let that be enough." By the third day her father's old house stood whole again. Its hearth lit. Its fields cleared of overgrowth. Villagers came to offer seeds and young animals, small gestures of goodwill. And the forest? No longer feared. Children dared to play at its edge, laughing in the sun. No longer were they warned that, "The woods will curse you." The earth that had once been her grave now whispered of life, of hope. The roots that had tangled her now cradled wildflowers. Ava often walked among the trees. The birds sang as she passed. The wind stirred the leaves softly as though welcoming her home. And in the village square, when her name was spoken, it was no longer with fear, but with respect. A story told for generations. Of the girl who rose from the grave. Of the truth that could not be buried. Of justice claimed by her own hand.